But Havlicek steals it. Havlicek stole the ball. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier.
United to Amici. Amici powers in.
Won their 6th NBA championship.
Gibson, swing. This is going to be a home run. Unbelievable. I don't believe what I just saw.
Hello, I'm Chris Fowler for SportsCentury. While his pit crew would frantically signal for him to slow down because he had the race won, while Bill Vukovich would be pushing for more speed. He wanted not just victories, but records too. His style was to charge, and it drove him to 2 straight Indy 500 triumphs. It also led to his death while trying for a 3rd.
Bill Vukovich was one of the legendary characters in the history of the Indianapolis 500. And there's no question that in the first half of the 50s, there was basically, he was far and away the man.
Some people say he was Indy's greatest driver. I say that he was, and I'm very proud of that fact.
I think Bill Vukovich was probably the greatest actual driver we've ever known. I mean, in terms of his skill and his ability and his determination.
Bill Vukovich was often referred to as the giant of midgets. He was a midget racer, and he was really quick racing midgets. He loved doing it. And he was modest about his achievements, but he was very focused on his goals. He wanted to lead a race, he wanted to win a race.
He won the races by dint of a heavy foot and a clear eye and an ability to drive these things and knowing when to do this and when to do that.
Billy Vukovich was a unique individual. He had the ability to understand his car, work on his car, and anybody that ran against him knew they were going to run second. He was the Babe Ruth of automobile racing.
He had a great determination once he was on the racetrack to win and to get to the front and to pass the car in front of him, and he was absolutely just ferocious about that.
Billy was a very tough individual. He was ruggedly built. He was about 5'10". He only had one thing in mind, and his focus was on winning.
He wasn't really a big guy, but I'll tell you what, I wouldn't have wanted to tangle with him if I was 9 foot tall with 6 foot arms. I mean, the guy was tougher than anybody I knew.
He actually worked out. He was one of the first pioneering drivers that actually worked out so that he would be fit to be able to withstand the racing.
A month before qualifying time to go back to Indy, he'd go over there and physically take wheels off of trucks every day and sweat. I mean, just sweat and work day after day after day.
Bill Vukovich was fearless at the wheel of a car. He depended entirely on the car doing what it's supposed to do and drove it accordingly. He never really babied a racing car.
He had no fear of any situation or any person, and apparently was not intimidated by the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
When you're racing against great drivers like that, and you see them underneath you, and you realize that, okay, that's Bill Vukovich, that's Dale Earnhardt, and in my case, that's Sleepy Tripp, and the great midget driver, they have you half beat already, because it's like in the back of your mind, you're going, oh man, you know what, I've got to really stay in front of this guy. And sometimes they don't have to do a thing to you, but it forces you to make the error. You do it to yourself.
My father, I guarantee you, had to be such an intimidating person because he wouldn't let anybody know what was inside of him.
Most people who choose auto racing as a career have an ego, and Bill Vukovich had no visible ego.
One sports writer, David Coleman, referred to Bill Vukovich as the Hamlet of the half mile. And that image conjures up a brooding, enigmatic individual. He was taciturn. He wasn't the friendliest. It's almost as though he had no time for that. He wasn't a backslapper. He wasn't one of the guys. He was the guy you better not see in your rearview mirror.
There was a great mystique about Vukovich. He was like this mystery character because he had this name, but people didn't know anything about him because he didn't talk to anybody.
My dad was pretty determined. They tell me that when someone went with him, he would talk with them a little bit, and the closer they got to the racetrack, the quieter he would get.
Then after the races, Uncle Billy was not one that stayed there very long. He'd get the race car loaded and he was gone. So they didn't really know him, and they thought he was arrogant. He didn't take the time to talk to them.
In actuality, you know, he had a sense of humor, but this sense of humor was always really shown to his intimates, to his really close friends.
I've had several people say that in the garage, I mean, he'd be cutting up and you know, carrying on and joking. If somebody came in that he didn't know, he'd clam up.
Bill, when he was with people he was familiar with, was a very outspoken and fun guy to be around and a great needler.
He was a lot of fun, and he could tell a lot of jokes, too. When we got to the racetrack, it was totally a different thing. It was all racing.
In the mid-1940s, Bill Vukovich was a giant in one class of auto racing, the Midget circuit. Then in 1953 and 54, he stepped up in size, speed, and fame, winning back-to-back Indianapolis 500s.
He won race after race after race, and he developed into such a driver that's when he moved on to Indianapolis.
People say sometimes, you know, gosh, he came from the Busch Leagues and went to the top, but he was the top of the Busch Leagues. And when he went to Indy cars, he went right into the middle echelon and quickly made it right to the top.
When he burst on the scene at Indianapolis, he essentially dominated. He led over 400 laps in the amount of time that he was there, which was from 51 to 55, which is an incredible dominance. And he did it so quickly where other great drivers, it takes them a while to get used to the place.
There have been other good drivers since Billy's time, A.J. Foyt, Parnelli Jones, a lot of others. But it took them quite a few years to compile their wins. Bill could have done this 4 years in a row. No driver's ever dominated the race as he has.
If his career continued on as it had at Indy, I mean, it just was conceivable that he would have been unbeatable there.
Everybody felt that it was a foregone conclusion that Bill Vukovich, as long as he was in the Indy 500, he would keep on winning.
He was like a skyrocket. He just came from nowhere, and all of a sudden he was on the highest of high plateaus.
Bill Vukovich was on top of the world, and you know, really little did he know what was around the corner for him.
In those days, people used to talk about the Speedway jinx. The idea was that no matter how good you were, you couldn't win 3 in a row. In racing, you never knew. Vuki was only involved in Indy cars for 5 years. In hindsight, it was a little too long.
Born in Alameda, California in December of 1918, Bill Vukovich grew up in the San Joaquin Valley, one of the nation's richest farming areas. But rich did not describe his circumstances.
He was the son of immigrants. They were paupers. They were, I think, great farmers. He had very limited education and certainly was not raised with airs and graces.
They had a large family, 5 sisters, 3 brothers, and just like all America, they were poor because of the Depression. It was a tough life for them.
My grandmother did not speak English. They all had to work. The boys, of course, had to do twice as much, and if my grandfather did not think they were doing enough, he would take it upon himself to make sure that they did more. Grandpa would hit them. He was a very, very, very demanding man. In those days, you know, the man ruled the house no matter what you said or what you thought.
Vukovich and his 7 siblings faced deprivations greater than poverty. On Bill's 14th birthday, his father committed suicide.
My grandfather did take his own life by shooting himself. He didn't know how to really cope with everything. When he lost everything in the Depression, the house burned, they lost everything then. They were basically destitute, and my grandfather couldn't take it. He was a very proud man, and to lose it all, it was very hard.
5 sisters and 3 brothers, 8 of them, and now they gotta make this thing work, and they did. I mean, they had to.
We worked on the ranch. They all worked. Some of the girls I know did housework and that to make money. Some of them worked in the packing houses, and they packed fruit.
Well, the 3 boys didn't want to stay in farming, and they ended up being in the mechanical jobs in the mechanical industry around the Central Valley.
They all helped to keep Grandma, paid to help her to live. She could not have lived without them because she was not well either.
In March of 1939, Bill's mother died of heart disease.
There wasn't a lot of money to go to doctors, and she did not complain, so they really didn't know that anything really was wrong with her. Basically, they sucked it in and they went on because they had been through this before, and they felt, they wanted a better life.
Shadowed by a mean existence made worse by the loss of his parents, the high school dropout sought meaning within the precise dimensions of a racetrack.
Bill found his salvation in driving a race car. It was something that came natural to him.
His first exposure as a driver came through a man named Fred Gerhardt. Bill would go by and kind of pester him and hang at a shop and watch what he was doing. Through this persistent bugging, Mr. Gerhardt at the time finally gave him a drive in this 30 Chevy Roadster.
Bill shared his passion for midget auto racing with his older brothers, Eli and Mike.
Eli and Mike were altogether different than Billy was. When they got out there to run on the racetrack and they ran wheel to wheel, believe me, there was no love between either one of them.
Bill had a driving style unlike any other that I had ever seen. When Bill was in a race car, he used what we call reverse body English, leaning to the right of the race car, and no other drivers use that style.
I've seen him many times start dead last, and in 10 laps while he was leading it, I mean, he charged that hard.
When you could see Vuk start in the back and work his way through and zip, zip, zip and pass him, you didn't know whether he was going to come by on the outside or the inside. It was exciting in the car as well as in the grandstands.
The appearance of the midget racing car in the American motorsports scene is perhaps the most significant happening in the entire history of that sport. Along comes the midget, and every baseball diamond, high school field, and athletic park had the potential of becoming a midget racetrack, and hundreds were.
It just exploded into a terrific thing. Everybody could watch it. It was just like watching something in your own living room.
The entertainment value was exciting, not only from the standpoint of the close racing, but always the possibility of a spectacular spill.
California had a proliferation of racetracks from the northern border to the Mexican border, and racing was on 7 nights a week, and that's when Bill Vukovich was at his busiest.
It was a tough life. You had to run and run and run and run, and got very little sleep, and lived on hamburgers and stuff like that.
Unable to support himself on his racing earnings, Vukovich worked during the day in an auto parts store. He sustained a broken collarbone and a burned hand in his first serious crash.
Back in those days, racing was a very dangerous sport, so they had to be aggressive. Bill was maybe a little more aggressive because he had no fear whatsoever in a race car.
If you're a race driver and you concern yourself with fear, you ain't gonna make it to the front.
Bill Vukovich Sr. was known as fearless, was an absolutely fearless guy. He was such a tough driver, and we all want to be tough, but he was from an era of no whiners.
In March of 1941, Vukovich married Esther Schmidt.
She was very good to him, and he was to her. But it was not an easy life for either one of them because of being on the go all the time.
They raised 2 children, Marlene and son Bill Jr., in one of Fresno's middle-class neighborhoods.
Bill was a very devout family man. He cared very, very much about his offspring and his wife, and he treated them all with the deepest kindness.
Yeah, he was an excellent provider, naturally. He won races, he made money, and he took care of his family. It was important to him.
Maya and Esther, Uncle Billy would call her and say, okay, we're going to leave at 2 o'clock. And then he would decide to leave at noon. She would have to have a babysitter, the food in the house, and everything, and be ready to go with him. And she did it, but it was what he wanted, when he wanted it.
First time I ever saw my dad run a race was out at the time Airport Speedway, and he got upside down. All I was screaming was, my daddy, my daddy.
Racing in the 40s and 50s was often on the back pages of the newspaper, unless, of course, there had been an accident, and then suddenly it was on the front pages. But I think that's why a lot of people went. They didn't want to see people killed, but the sudden shift of a guy leading the race to tragedy or an accident or a pileup, it's kind of what they were waiting for, and racing gave it to them.
By the end of World War II, Bill Vukovich was regarded by many as midget racing's premier star.
He had bought a race car during the war and had rebuilt that car to his specifications. And here again, this shows his ingenuity because he came right out of the box after World War II and was an instant winner.
In a second decade of racing midgets, Vukovich's West Coast dominance was breeding contempt among his peers.
A lot of times I used to sit there in the stands, and when they'd announce his name, they'd boo. I never could understand that. That hurt me for many years.
I can remember when Bill was winning right and left, and he was beating some of the other crowd favorites. That when his name was announced, it was a big boo, but they still came to see him run because he was exciting.
Towards the end of the 1940s, midget racing in California's popularity started to wane. They built way too many racetracks, so some of the cream of the crop, the top drivers, started to go back to the Midwest to see if they could find better purses.
Well, that's when Vukovich says, hey, there's got to be a better deal than this, and that's when he loaded up his gear and went back there.
Many Californians would race in California, put their car on a trailer and head east where the money was, and in so doing, established a talent to handle different kind of racetracks.
In those days, it was rather like a baseball system. I mean, you actually would have to come up through the ranks. You proved yourself.
If Vukovich had become a pariah in West Coast midget circles, they loved his savvy and aggression on the Midwest circuit. After winning the national midget title in 1950, he was primed for America's most glamorous car competition.
If you wanted to go to Indianapolis, you needed to get noticed. And secondly, you needed to be part of the AAA championship.
That was the sanctioning body for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and to get your license, you had to, at one point, actually win a couple races in the AAA to even be considered for a test at Indianapolis.
Johnny Parsons won in 1950, and he was the first of the graduates of the midget racing school to win at Indianapolis, and that sort of opened the door for all of his colleagues, one of whom was Bill Vukovich.
When a race driver finally makes it to Indianapolis, he feels like that he's got it made. This is the place where you can really become famous and you can really make a name for yourself.
In 1950, Bill Vukovich had gone back east and raced across the street from Indianapolis Motor Speedway at the famous 16th Street Speedway. He'd caught the attention of Wilbur Shaw, who ran Indianapolis Motor Speedway at the time.
The story is that he showed up to take his rookie test, walked through the pit gate out into the pits, looked north, looked south, and said, well, I ought to win at least 2 or 3 of these.
The recommendation by Wilbur Shaw certainly helped him along, helped him to the extent that Wilbur recognized ability, got a ride in the Maserati. The Maserati was outdated. It wasn't Bill's fault that he couldn't qualify, but he just couldn't go fast enough because the car was not ready to run that fast.
In 1951, Vukovich qualified for the 20th position in the 33-car field at the Indianapolis 500.
1951, that was Bill's real first 500, which showed that not only could he run the short tracks, but he could also be a front runner at the Indianapolis 500.
After 15 laps, he was running 10th. Although a broken oil tank knocked him out of the race 14 laps later, his early rush was a sign of things to come. In May of 1952, Bill Vukovich was back at the Indianapolis Speedway.
Bill Vukovich got the best break he'd ever had in his life in auto racing. He got hired by Howard Keck, and he had two fine mechanics in Jim Travers and Frank Kuhn.
You talk about a top flight race car. Keck's was the Penske cars of that era.
1952 at Indy was more or less, it was a chaotic year for us. The car had many things that had not been thoroughly finished, and we went through many all-night sessions of getting this car in shape.
Despite the adjustment problems of a new car with a radical design, Vukovich qualified for the third row with an average of 138 miles an hour.
The race is on. 12 laps. Ruckman and Vukovich are dueling for the lead.
He had the race clearly in his pocket when some very inexpensive part broke in the steering mechanism, and he coasted up and grazed the wall. Troy Ruckman, who was a distant second, passed 9 laps to go to win his first Indy 500 and become the youngest winner of the race.
The mechanical failure ended Vukovich's run on the 192nd lap. But again, his performance was impressive.
He was the talk of the town back there, Billy Vukovich. I mean, he wasn't out beating his tom-toms or anything like that. He was just going out on the track and showing his ability.
In 1953, Vukovich was poised for success in his third run at the Indy 500. Dark, rain-laden clouds hovered over the speedway.
When we lined up to qualify, it looked very much like it was going to rain, and we were quite worried about it. We launched Vuk, and he went out, and he was doing quite well. And on the last lap, we had a downpour, and there was a rooster tails were flying so high you couldn't even see him. Well, it ended up that we sat on the pole. He set a new track record, and then he used to needle the other drivers, saying, "I can drive faster than you can in the rain."
The 1953 race day was a far cry from qualifying day when it rained. It was extremely hot.
The track temperature, I know, which was the brick straightaway, was 130 degrees.
I do recall Bill said before the race, he says, if I have any trouble, if it won't run right, he says, I'm bringing it in. If it runs okay, he says, I'm going to smoke them off.
Indianapolis and the 500. Last-minute tune-ups for racing cars set for 200 laps on the famed Oval Speedway. And behind the pace setter, 33 get away with a temperature a torrid 130 degrees on the track. And that is hot, as 175,000 perspiring patrons can attest. Hottest in the 37-year history of the 500. Heat really takes a terrific toll today. One driver, the veteran Carl Scarborough of Michigan, died of heat exhaustion and a heart attack after completing only 1/3 of the distance.
There's a signal in racing where a driver taps his head, and that's before radios, and that meant put somebody else under this helmet, and that's the call for relief. And all but 5 drivers in that year's race tapped their helmets before the checkered flag waved, but not Bill Vukovich.
How he managed to run that entire race, something would be hard for me to understand, but he was tougher than the most of us, I'm sure. The only time I saw him was when he came around to lap me. And, of course, you always gave him plenty of room because he just went right on by.
Despite the brutal conditions, Vukovich took a commanding lead. Running first in all but 5 laps, the 34-year-old won his first Indy 500.
Bill Vukovich of Fresno, California flashes across the winner, 3 laps to the good. His elapsed time was 3 hours and 53 minutes. Last year, he cracked up only 8 laps from victory. So winning this year makes victory doubly sweet.
When he won the race, this probably also added to the mystique. He gets out of the car, the Iron Man and the sweltering heat and everything, and somebody said, "Was it hot out there?" And he said, "Do you think that's hot? You ought to try driving a tractor in Fresno in July."
Bill Vukovich, I don't think had a bone in his body that had any fear in it. He would be as mad at second place as he would at 33rd place. He couldn't stand to not win a race. That was something that set him apart, and I think the other drivers in that time knew it.
If winning the 1953 Indianapolis 500 lifted Bill Vukovich into the upper echelon of racing, what he did for an encore in 1954 solidified his place in history.
In the car Vukovich drove, there was engine difficulty, and he wound up starting the race in 19th position, good ways back. It concerned everybody but Vukovich.
There were several of the other drivers that certainly were on top of the heap as far as being pre-race favorites. And Bill would walk by and he'd just give me a little wink and said, "Boys, it's just going to be a little more difficult this time than it has been."
Starting deep in the field, he passed car after car to take the lead 8 laps before the halfway mark, and then went on to lap the field despite slowing down signals from his pits.
The determination that he showed in that cockpit and going through that traffic and maneuvering and working his way through the traffic and making adjustments during the race and coming on to win that race, and not only winning it, but as I remember, he lapped second spot, which was Jimmy Bryan.
After 200 grueling laps, Vukovich blew first across the finish line to become the 3rd driver to win back-to-back Indy 500s.
A tired but triumphant Bill Vukovich said, "I'm half deaf from the noise, half blind from the oil." And when you look at him, he was.
There is a famous photo, Bill sitting there by himself, and you can see that he's drenched with perspiration, and you can see that he's exhausted. He doesn't have anything to say. He obviously is just meditating about the situation.
Gaining a payday of $75,000, the poor kid from San Joaquin Valley knew how to manage his swelling income.
He was ahead of his time in his day because when he did make a buck, he put a bunch of money in a mutual fund. Now, this is 1953, 54. And he bought a couple service stations, and he would actually go down there and work himself.
Here was Bill Vukovich. He just had, in several instances, the biggest payday you could have in American racing. He'd go back to his gas station, and there were days when he'd be out there pumping gas. You could pull into his station, and the Indy 500 winner would be cleaning your windshield, checking your oil.
Bill was a good businessman because he was always pretty short on money. And when he got to making money, he watched his money.
Billy, from the very beginning, was aware of the fact that winning a race tied into how much his earnings was going to be, and he was strictly a money driver.
You know, the fact that Bill Vukovich is noted as a money driver, I think, comes back to his background. A child of the Depression, wanted to be a good provider for his family because that was a value that he was brought up with.
Later in 1954, Vukovich entered his first international competition.
For him to jump out of a lightweight open-wheel cockpit automobile and make the transition to a stock car under those conditions on that type of race course and do an outstanding job was, to me, phenomenal, and it just proved the point. Bill Vukovich was a race driver. Didn't make any difference what type of race car he strapped on. He was going to run up in front.
On day 2 of the 1,900-mile race, Vukovich and co-pilot Vern Huell were running second in their class when both went off the road in the Sierra Madre Mountains. They barely escaped with their lives.
I think they just miscalculated on that corner, and as they were headed off the road, Vukovich told Vern, he says, okay, he says, it's all yours, you take over. You've been wanting to drive it, here it is, it's all yours, baby.
At our time in automobile racing, safety really wasn't given too much thought. The cars were very, very dangerous. Usually, if a guy had a serious accident, we went to a funeral.
In 1955, Bill Vukovich set his sights on a new horizon, an unprecedented third straight victory at Indy. Qualifying for the 5th position, Vukovich raised the hopes of car owner Lindsey Hopkins.
The morning of the race, we were walking out the track, just the two of us. And he says, I'm going to win this thing today. And he says, I'm going to park on the back straight away and walk off through the motel.
Everybody likes to be known as a hard runner. And of course, they know beyond a doubt that my father was. I don't think he wanted to run that race. I don't think it was a burning desire of him to win 3 in a row, because he could have rode off in the sunset real easy, and they would have understood. But the day of the race, you can't quit.
Vukovich would have more than self-doubt to overcome. His chief rival, Jack McGrath, was primed to end Vukovich's streak.
When race day rolled around, Vuki, he was quite out of sorts with me because McGrath was considerably faster than we were. And the main reason McGrath was faster was because he was running nitromethane. And I told him, Vuk, I said, you're going to see McGrath blow up.
When the race started, Vukovich and McGrath hooked up in a seesaw duel where they traded the lead off, and finally McGrath's car broke as forecast by Vukovich's mechanics, leaving the way clear for Vukovich out front.
Free of McGrath's challenge, Vukovich was running away from the field. Then came lap 57.
We'd just made a pit stop and we'd completely filled the car with fuel, and everything was on the up and up again. It was just going beautiful.
Near the head of the backstretch, Roger Ward's car broke an axle and he spun.
I was coming out of turn 2. My race car wound up right in the middle of the racetrack, and the only thing that I was thinking is, God, I hope somebody doesn't run into this race car. And then Vukovich and Johnny Boyd came around there almost together.
And I was not paying attention to the guy in front of me. I was looking down the racetrack. There was enough room for me to drive inside of Ward.
Al Keller, I think, was the car immediately behind me, and he spun out.
And Keller, as we come out onto the front straightaway, slammed on the brakes and lost control of the car.
And Al Keller's car ran into Boyd's car, and he was pushed into Vukovich's car.
I just felt like I was blown out of a cannon. And that was when Vukovich ran into the back end of me on the right rear. And we both catapulted up in the air over the top of Keller. And our cars did a barrel roll in the air. The bottom of my car caught the bridge, and the cockpit of Billy's car caught the bridge. And that was the difference of me sitting here telling you this story and Billy not.
Bill Vukovich died instantly, partially decapitated by the impact of hitting the bridge.
A column of smoke arose, a big column of black smoke, and Vuk didn't appear. I went down to that area just as quickly as I could, and our car had gone completely over the wall and was upside down and was still on fire. Cagle, who was the superintendent of Indianapolis Motor Speedway, was there, and he just shook his head and said, Jim, he's had it.
We were at home and we were listening to the race, and it sounded like Uncle Billy was doing so well, as he always did. And then the silence came, and then the news, what had happened, and it was devastating.
I know that the day of the accident, they come by, part of the family, and they said, Billy, we want you to come with us. And I said, my dad's all right. Don't worry about it. Now, I was only 11 years old, and I pictured the car in the infield with him standing behind it with an engine fire. And when they announced on TV that my dad was gone, I mean, boy, that just hit me like a... In fact, I actually think that I blacked out for like 10 seconds.
You know what? You always think your dad's invincible. You always think, oh, it's never going to happen. It can never happen to me.
You know something that just dawned on me? He never called my mother the day of the race. He did in '55. He said, wear this white dress. And she said, okay, I'll see you in Victory Lane. And that's the last things he said to her.
The day that he was killed, my mother was quite broken up over it because she really liked Bill Vukovich. And I remember asking, do you think he was scared when this happened? And she said, no, I know Bill Vukovich. He wasn't scared. He was mad.
Roger Ward, whose spin-out started the mayhem, was mad at himself.
I still blame myself for not having the good judgment to bring that car in off the racetrack and put it in the garage, because that car is what caused that accident, and we lost one of the truly great people in the universe with Bill Vukovich. I just, every time I think about it, I still get upset. Eli Vukovich told me after we went to the funeral and everything, says Billy would be very upset if you retired because of this, because he knows that it's not your fault. And so I didn't retire, thank goodness, and was able to go out and win a race a couple times myself.
In June of 1955, Bill Vukovich was laid to rest in his hometown of Fresno.
It was really a sad day. I think everybody felt it. Everybody was talking about it.
The whole family has always been loved by Fresno, because they put us on the map, so to speak.
In Fresno, even today, the Vukovich name rings a bell. My father was a hero to everybody in this town. This was a rallying point for these people.
Not too long ago, I happened to be down there, and the inscription says it all. I couldn't have asked for finer words to be on that monument. I'm proud of my dad.
Despite the tragic death of his father, Bill Jr. followed him into racing, winning Indy 500 Rookie of the Year in 1968.
Vukovich II was more like an Al Unser. He would bring them home second, third, fourth, rather than blow up leading.
I can imagine when Bill Jr. sat in a race car and he was out there and he was trying to live up to his dad's expectations or his expectations of what his dad would want, what a tough proposition that would be.
Racing to my father was a way to make a buck. And to me, I felt the same way.
Billy II was a better race driver than he believed himself to be. And I don't think that he had the desire that Billy I or Billy III had to compete.
In 1988, Bill Vukovich III extended the family name by also winning Rookie of the Year at the Indianapolis 500.
When Billy III started racing, his father was quite protective of him. You could see the pride, though, that his father had once Billy III started to win races and emulate the success of his grandfather and his father.
I was very worried about him. I mean, I couldn't even watch him race sometimes.
In November 1990, the hammer of family tragedies struck again. Bill Vukovich III was killed when he hit the wall while practicing for a race in Bakersfield, California. He was 27.
I was present at the accident at Bakersfield, which took Bill's life. And when we found out about it, my friend and I just got in the car and drove home. Just couldn't take it.
I think about Billy every day. I think about my dad every day. I haven't come to terms with either one of them's death, and I probably never will.
Racing made the Vukoviches. Bill Sr., with his two-time Indy wins, he was sensational in his day, almost unstoppable. Bill Jr., his son, became a successful driver, and tragically, Billy III, after becoming Indy Rookie of the Year, was subsequently killed. Racing made the Vukoviches, and it took away everything.
There's not going to be any more Vukoviches in a race car, and I'm glad of that. I mean, that suits me just fine. I still like racing a lot, but as far as dwelling on the three Vukoviches, I don't do that much anymore because they were bad memories.
They called Bill Vukovich the Mad Russian. He wasn't Russian, but he didn't dispute the first part of that nickname. Of all the places he won, Indianapolis was his favorite. He was able to reduce the 500 to the most elemental terms. The only way to win here, he said, is to keep your foot on the throttle and turn left. For SportsCentury, I'm Chris Fowler.